Welcome to the Hormone Optimizing Warrior MD, the How MD podcast, your reliable and trusted source for information on hormone therapy for menopause and beyond, and on how to advance into the second half of your life with confidence and optimism, knowing your hormones are optimized, in alignment and balance with everything else in your body. Whether it is hormone therapy, peptide therapy, laser therapy, or some other new technology applicable to maintaining our vitality, mental and physical strength, you will hear all about it in this podcast. And you will also hear how to implement the facts and information presented so that you can take action and optimize your hormones and optimize your body. Last week's episode was an introduction into testosterone's value for cardiovascular health and its important role for maintaining muscular strength, which directly and intimately correlates with longevity in women. Testosterone is somewhat considered the step cousin of estrogen. And I think probably 90% of women who come into a doctor's office looking for hormone therapy after menopause are ultimately just asking about estrogen, ignoring testosterone. However, there's probably about 10%, maybe 20%, and the percentage is growing, of women who come in specifically asking about testosterone. The word is out that testosterone is a great hormone. So it's worthwhile talking about it. I ended last week's episode talking about the 4 different processes through which testosterone signaling and likely testosterone therapy will impact cardiovascular health in women as they age, and what really matters when it comes to testosterone therapy and its safety. So today's episode, it's about these 4 important processes, which is number 1, testosterone dose. Number 2, the duration of exposure to testosterone therapy. Number 3, testosterone receptor availability in a woman's heart tissues and blood vessel tissues. And number 4, the balance between testosterone and estrogen signaling and the overall hormone environment in a woman's body and in her cardiovascular system. So, number 1, how does testosterone dosing influence cardiovascular risk? Well, first and foremost, it will depend from woman to woman, as there is variability in receptor response, which I will get into a little later and tell you more about receptor signaling and why it is important, because obviously testosterone cannot work as a form of therapy unless it can interact with available receptors. Now, there is no debate that low dose physiologic levels of testosterone are of no danger to women when it comes to cardiovascular risk. However, high-dose testosterone therapy creating supraphysiologic levels requires monitoring. And we do not have any data regarding long-term cardiovascular safety, but we do know that there are potential implications for alterations in lipid profile, possible elevations of blood pressure, and possible association with insulin resistance. So I want to talk about each one of these 3 things, because it's important for you to know, if you're considering testosterone therapy, how critical it is that all these 3 things are being looked at and monitored. Number 1, lipid profile changes. Lipid profile changes with testosterone therapy are important. And in some women, they simply happen because testosterone therapy will help change the body's composition by increasing lean mass and decreasing the percentage of body fat. In which case, guess what? The woman will have a favorable response and she will see an improvement in her lipid profile. However, higher testosterone doses used for long-term, years, 5 or more, or decades, are very likely to produce unfavorable changes in the lipid profile. And what is interesting is that the formulation of testosterone and the difference between delivery methods and their bioavailability can have highly different metabolic impacts. So it will be very, very difficult at this point to generalize and say all testosterone therapy increases risk because we don't have that data and nobody has looked at it and very few people talk about it. But it's very likely that significant surges of testosterone levels from a daily cream or a weekly shot might be more damaging and disturbing in the long term than it is just keeping the level steady of testosterone, maybe with injectable or pellet therapy. It is also very likely that women who already suffer from dyslipidemia, which is an abnormal lipid metabolic profile, or women who already suffer from obesity or insulin resistance or diabetes might have more pronounced lipid changes with testosterone therapy. There is a possible increase in the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, and sometimes that is also accompanied by a decrease in the good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol, which is exactly the opposite way we want it. We want less bad cholesterol and more good cholesterol. And triglycerides can also be increased in some women. There's a huge variability here. Now, here's the thing. The body is complicated, and looking at simply one thing is never going to give us the correct picture. It is true that testosterone therapy by itself, high dose, long term, can create all these changes, but the coexistent hormone balance, the estrogen status, the thyroid and adrenal function, and an already existent abnormal metabolic condition will modify the response of the lipid profile to testosterone therapy. Similarly, if a woman decides to use testosterone therapy combined with estrogen or alone by itself, and her thyroid function is completely ignored, and she suffers from suboptimal thyroid function, her lipid profile response to testosterone therapy will be very different. Should her thyroid function be optimized either before therapy with testosterone is considered or at the same time, she will probably have less of an unfavorable response to the testosterone therapy. So optimizing thyroid with testosterone therapy is important. If a woman uses testosterone therapy and her significant spikes in cortisol levels caused by an unaddressed HPA, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis imbalance, that's in other words, an exaggerated stress response, not balanced well or not balanced at all by an insufficient rest and digest parasympathetic system response, and we give someone like that testosterone, and we have high surges of testosterone for long term, we're simply asking for trouble. And it's a given that the lipid changes caused by testosterone will be probably amplified by the excess cortisol surges that are released into the system by this unaddressed stress response. So in conclusion, when it comes to testosterone's dosing impact on lipid profile changes, I would definitely advise monitoring carefully the lipid profile at least every 6 months for all women who are undergoing long-term testosterone therapy, and possibly monitor the lipid profile sooner or more often if the testosterone dose is increased, or if the woman suffers from all of the other risk factors that I mentioned before: obesity, thyroid, adrenal imbalances, not enough estrogen, PCOS, etc. Let's talk about the next possible change that requires monitoring during high-dose supraphysiologic testosterone therapy, and that is the blood pressure. So let's talk about the blood pressure impact from testosterone therapy. It is very likely that low doses or physiologic levels of testosterone have no consistent impact on blood pressure for women. However, higher testosterone levels or supraphysiologic doses, which are frequently used in testosterone therapy, can impact blood pressure and can cause elevations of someone's blood pressure. The main mechanism is thought to be due to the testosterone's effect on fluid retention and electrolyte balance. Testosterone generally promotes the sodium reabsorption in the kidneys, and obviously water follows the sodium, so the body will start holding on to some excess water, causing some puffiness in the face, the hands, or the ankles. Excess water means increased volume in the system, means higher blood pressure. Also, testosterone as an anabolic hormone, will increase the storage of glycogen in the muscle. And due to the increased glycogen, there might be some additional water storage in the developing muscle tissues during testosterone therapy, contributing to the water excess. Now, usually the weight change on the scale is in the range of 5, maximum 10 pounds. And it's usually temporary, as most of the water retention caused by the elevation in testosterone levels will be resolved after a few months. And it usually goes away once the body is establishing its new hormone balance. However, women with existent high blood pressure, obese women, or women suffering from metabolic syndrome might be more susceptible to these blood pressure changes, and they should have their blood pressure monitored routinely at home with a blood pressure monitor twice a day. They should keep a blood pressure log, and this blood pressure log should be recorded and brought in for every visit, so the physician can understand if there's a need for changes in the blood pressure therapy or there's a need for a short-term diuretic therapy. Usually, spironolactone is a mild diuretic, effectively blocking the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone, and is very useful at managing the side effect of temporary water retention caused by testosterone therapy. I am personally not a fan of continuous long-term spironolactone therapy. But for women who are experiencing periodic surges in testosterone levels, as we sometimes see when pellet therapy is administered and a testosterone pellet is inserted, it could be beneficial to consider spironolactone for 30 days after a pellet insertion in women who have proven to be sensitive to the water retention side effect caused by testosterone. So I talked about the lipid profile changes, the blood pressure changes. Last but not least, I'd like to talk about the insulin resistance as a consequence of testosterone dosing for long-term testosterone therapy. When it comes to insulin resistance, we have enough data that links increased testosterone levels, which occur naturally, similar to PCOS. Regarding insulin resistance, we have enough data that links the fact that naturally increased testosterone levels occurring in PCOS conditions increase insulin resistance and produce an unfavorable metabolic profile. However, this association between high testosterone and insulin resistance or an unfavorable metabolic profile does not necessarily prove causation, because PCOS is a very complex metabolic issue where we have inflammation, obesity, and a major imbalance between what's considered to be too much testosterone, not enough estrogen, and a disturbed sensitivity of the insulin receptor. You know what's interesting? What is interesting is that testosterone at carefully monitored doses can help increase a woman's muscle mass. And it can improve her insulin sensitivity by improving her body composition. The increase in lean muscle will improve glucose uptake into the cells, optimize the resting metabolic rate, and supporting an improved cellular response to insulin, which means it improves insulin sensitivity. So clearly, too much testosterone is not good and will likely contribute to increase the risk of insulin resistance, whereas just the right amount of testosterone will likely help improve insulin sensitivity. How are we to know what is the right dose for each woman, as they all have different lifestyle, different types of exercise, different body weight compositions, and different estrogen status? Well, monitoring specific biological markers like fasting glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, a lipid profile, and a comprehensive metabolic panel looking for elevations in liver enzymes is always a good idea when testosterone therapy is provided. So I talked about testosterone therapy dosing. I'd like to talk next about the duration of testosterone therapy. How does the duration of testosterone therapy impact cardiovascular risk for women? Well, we presume the longer the exposure to high-dose supraphysiologic testosterone, probably the higher the risk. Unfortunately, we do not have enough data to support this statement. And the cardiovascular risk is not fully clear. And we do have very limited evidence around benefits versus risks with testosterone therapy long-term in women. There just isn't a lot of interest in this area. Not on the side of women. Women are interested. They want to know. It's just that there are not enough researchers looking at this. And when testosterone therapy in women is studied, is purely studied for addressing low sexual desire as a primary objective, and the other stuff is collateral damage. However, women who experience testosterone therapy and its benefits of improved mood, improved energy, better strength, better stamina, better endurance, and better motivation to be active and exercise, as well as increased sexual desire, they would like to be in it for the long haul. Women who love testosterone for all the well-being improvements would like to know that they are safe using it for long periods of time, maybe for the rest of their life, alongside an estrogen therapy. And here are some key takeaway points. Baseline risk always matters because women who already have existing cardiovascular risk factors like obesity, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, or diabetes may unfortunately have a higher risk for cardiovascular events with ongoing exposure to supraphysiologic testosterone levels and will require ongoing, careful monitoring by physicians who are educated into the ins and outs and pros and cons of long-term testosterone therapy and menopause therapy specifically. Also, these underlying conditions which impact testosterone therapy risk over time will have to be managed. The diabetes, the obesity, the hypertension, the hyperlipidemia. So ideally and optimally, your physician will be trained in managing all of these issues. And hopefully you just have one captain to manage this ship. Because the more captains running your hormone therapy ship, the more likely something will get missed and not addressed promptly or appropriately because you are now placing your trust and your care in multiple physicians, not just one. Your hormone doctor, your cardiologist, your internal medicine doctor, your rheumatologist, etc. And unfortunately, the realistic situation is that these doctors do not talk to each other. And more so, they do not cooperate with each other regarding your treatment and your safety. So the best solution is to choose a physician who can not only manage your testosterone therapy safely, but who can also manage the other conditions if you are a woman who has these high-risk conditions, like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. So I talked about testosterone dosing. I talked about the duration of testosterone therapy and being in it for the long term. I want to talk about the availability of testosterone receptors within the cardiovascular system next, and why is that important? How does testosterone receptor availability impact cardiovascular risk? Well, I'm going to make a parallel to estrogen first. Everyone knows without shadow of a doubt that the estrogen hormone has an extraordinarily positive impact on cardiovascular health for women. Women know this. Doctors know this. We know that the estrogen interaction with the cells that line the vascular walls and the cells that compose the heart is exclusively through the interaction with estrogen receptors. So obviously the same goes for testosterone. It can only impact cardiovascular tissues and influence a woman's heart and her vascular health through testosterone receptors. So testosterone receptor expression is very, very important. And guess what? This is how we obtain a biological response with various hormonal and non-hormonal therapies. We target cellular receptors. But if a cell does not express a specific receptor that is being targeted, then the hormone or non-hormone therapy will not be able to impact the cell or have a biological effect on its function. So why does this matter? Because as it turns out, and you probably didn't know this, the expression of a receptor onto the surface of cells can change with age and can change with menopause. There's also significant individual variation in both receptor expression on the surface of cells and receptor function, which can explain why some women respond to testosterone therapy with cardiovascular and metabolic changes and some do not at the same high levels. So the number of testosterone receptors present in the heart and the blood vessels will vary by individual. And obviously, the more testosterone receptors a woman has expressed on the surface of her heart cells or vascular wall cells, the more intense the tissue response to the testosterone will be in that woman. Now, this is not something that can be measured or identified prior to initiating testosterone therapy. This is something that will become apparent as the woman starts testosterone therapy and her response to testosterone is more intense than initially expected, especially when it comes to her cardiovascular system. As I mentioned earlier, she might notice an increased water retention and elevations in the blood pressure. And she might notice alterations in the lipid profile with an undesirable increase in LDL, the bad cholesterol, and a decrease in HDL, the good cholesterol. On the other hand, it's very possible she will experience an increase in lean muscle and decrease in fat percentage, which will improve her insulin resistance with a favorable change in her fasting sugar, fasting insulin, or a favorable change in her hemoglobin A1C, and minimal to no changes in her lipid profile or blood pressure. This individual expression of testosterone receptors on not just the cardiovascular system, but in the other tissues and systems in the body is the explanation and the reason why testosterone therapy cannot be standardized, and it has to be totally and completely individualized. That is why what worked for your friend and your relative might not work for you. And that is why what worked great for you and what helped improve your mood, your energy, and helped you lose weight and actually changed your cholesterol profile for better might not work for your friend, who you are kind enough to refer to the same doctor who's managing your hormone therapy so successfully. I have one more thing to talk about, and that is the impact that the balance between testosterone and estrogen signaling and the overall hormone environment can have on testosterone's benefits or negative consequences on the cardiovascular system. But I'm afraid I ran out of time. I will continue with this important topic next week because I want to finalize the discussion on this topic of testosterone and cardiovascular health in women by discussing how we can integrate testosterone therapy with an already optimized hormonal environment, or at the same time as making a big effort to optimize the rest of the hormonal environment, which is more likely to positively impact cardiovascular health and have a significant impact on lowering morbidity and overall mortality in women as they continue to age post-menopause and enjoy the benefits of long-term hormone therapy with testosterone. Thank you for the time and energy you spent listening to my podcast. If this episode or another have caught your attention and delivered valuable information you have not heard anywhere else, and if you feel I have succeeded in my mission to provide the how to stay healthy and age beautifully, please leave me a review. Your opinion matters to me, and any suggestion to improve the podcast will help make it better for you and for others. You can send my staff a message directly by sending an email to receptionist@herahealthcare.info. I look forward to recording my next episode and being in your ear again.